You believe the worst moment is seeing your husband with his ex? You're wrong. The worst part is realizing the flight isn't just a getaway, it is an escape, and I am the only one left on the ground, holding no ticket, positioned to take the entire fall. They thought their plan was perfect. They miscalculated. My name is Alara Vance. I am 35 years old, and my job is to calculate the precise cost of disaster. As a senior risk analyst for Aperture Logistics, I identify vulnerabilities. I see the invisible tripwires in code, in contracts, and in human behavior. I was in the main terminal of Denver International Airport, running my own numbers. My flight to Frankfurt, a routine quarterly review, was boarding in 40 minutes over in Concourse A, but the only decent coffee was in Concourse J, a stupid, indulgent detour. It was that detour that cost me a marriage. It was that detour that saved my life. I was pulling the sleeve of my blazer back over my watch when I saw him. It was not a question, not a maybe. It was him, my husband, Julian Vance. He was supposed to be in Seattle. He was supposed to be in a cramped conference room, pitching venture capitalists. He had kissed me goodbye at 5 that morning, complaining about the turbulence on puddle jumpers. Julian was not in line for a puddle jumper. He was standing at gate J14, and he was not alone. He was with Sabine Dubois, his business partner, his ex-fiancée. The woman he had sworn to me, hand over his heart, was nothing but a professional contact, a necessary link to his past work. My vision tunneled. The roar of the terminal, the announcements, the whining wheels of roller bags, it all compressed into a dull, static hum. Time did not slow down. It simply became thick, like moving through water. They were laughing. Julian's head was tilted back, that full-throated laugh he saved for big wins. Sabine was looking up at him, radiant. His hand, my husband's hand, was resting on the curve of her waist. His thumb was stroking the fabric of her silk blouse. I did not move. I could not breathe. My analysis brain, the one that runs scenarios, fired off the first, obvious data point. Gate J14. I knew the international gates. J14 was not Seattle. It was not domestic. My eyes lifted to the blue departures board hanging above their heads. The letters were crisp, bright, and utterly impossible. Saar, Zurich, Flight LX-16, non-stop, Zurich, Switzerland. A wave of nausea, cold and acidic, rose in my throat. I stumbled back, my shoulder colliding hard with a structural pillar. The metal was cold against my blazer. I was hidden, shielded from their view. My heart was not beating, it was slamming, a trapped bird against my ribs. My training cut through the panic. My hand, shaking so violently I could barely grip the phone, came out of my pocket. Document. Observe. I raised the phone to my ear, tilting my head as if listening to a frustrating call, angling the camera lens just past the edge of the steel. I hit record. The microphone was sensitive. It sliced through the ambient noise, capturing their voices with terrifying clarity. "Just need the Zurich Trust to activate," Julian said. His voice was electric, vibrating with an adrenaline I had not heard in years. "Ilara's entire portfolio will be transferred before she even lands in Frankfurt. The timing is perfect." I felt the blood drain from my face. My portfolio. Not our portfolio. Mine. Sabine leaned in, her red hair brushing his chin. Her laugh was sharp. "And by the time the audit at Aperture finally flags the discrepancy, she'll be the only one there to take the blame." The phone did not waver. I held it perfectly still. It was not just theft. It was not just infidelity. It was a frame. A meticulous, calculated setup using my own career, my own position of trust at Aperture, as the murder weapon. They were going to strip me of everything and leave me holding the bag for their crime. "Final boarding call for Flight 16 to Zurich." The automated voice snapped me back. I watched them through the screen. Julian scanned both passes, his arm still locked around her. They did not look back. They walked down the jet bridge, two people starting a new life, disappearing into the tunnel. I stood there, paralyzed, until the gate door closed. The video file was 3 minutes and 12 seconds long. My phone buzzed, a calendar alert. Flight LH 447, Frankfurt, boarding gate A32. I did not go to my gate. I did not get on my flight. I turned, my carry-on bag suddenly feeling like it was filled with lead. I walked out of the terminal, past the long security lines, and into the sharp, thin bite of the Denver air. My heart was a shattered wreck, but my brain, the cold, calculating risk analyst part of my brain, was already booting up. The board was set, the variables were clear, and they had just made their first critical mistake. They left me behind. The cab ride from the airport back to Cherry Creek was silent. I did not cry. The shock had frozen, solidifying into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. When I unlocked the front door, the house was still. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Julian's coffee mug was still on the counter, a faint ring of espresso at the bottom. The photos on the mantelpiece, us in Vail, us at our wedding, felt like props. This was not a home. It was a crime scene. I dropped my carry-on bag at the door and went straight to my office. I locked the door. I sat at my desk, the hub of my professional life, and looked at the clean, organized space. Then I dismantled it. I pulled my 3 backup monitors from the closet, daisy-chaining them to my personal high-performance rig. I powered down my work-issued laptop and secured it in my safe. This was not an Aperture logistics problem yet. This was an Alara Vance problem. I rerouted my personal server through a series of encrypted virtual private networks, masking my digital footprint. My office became a command center. The emotional paralysis of the airport was gone, replaced by the familiar cold focus of a deep-dive analysis. I had to find the extent of the vulnerability. I started with Julian's private cloud server. We had separate digital lives, a rule I insisted on, but I knew his architecture, his password. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. My mind flashed to our anniversary, the date we met, his birthday. All wrong. My job is to find patterns in chaos. Julian was a man defined not by his successes, but by his failures. His first startup, the one that burned through his family's money before he ever met me. I typed in the date of its incorporation. Access granted. My stomach hollowed out. It was not our anniversary. It was the date of his first spectacular failure. The server was organized, but I was not looking for the obvious. I ran a search for hidden directories. One popped up, heavily encrypted Project Atlas. My blood ran cold. Atlas, the holding company he had created for his new venture, the one I had helped him fund. The encryption was military grade, but Julian, for all his grand vision, was lazy about security protocols he did not understand. The encryption key was not a password, it was tied to a physical token. He thought the token was secure in his wallet, on its way to Zurich. He did not know I had cloned it 6 months ago after he left it on his nightstand for a week. I inserted the duplicate key. The folder unlocked. It was not a business plan. It was a manifesto of fraud. Shell corporations in Switzerland, forged transfer documents, wire instructions, and my signature. My digital signature, the one secured by my corporate credentials, had been copied and applied to dozens of documents I had never seen. He had stolen my digital identity. I kept digging. My breath held tight in my chest. The plan was meticulous. It detailed the systematic draining of my personal portfolio, the one he had so graciously offered to manage. Then I found the emails, a dedicated encrypted channel between Julian and a name I knew, David Finch, a mid-level executive at Aperture, someone I had promoted 2 years ago. I read the exchange, my hands growing colder with every line. Julian's instructions were precise. David's replies were obsequious. They were planning to wait until I was wheels up over the Atlantic. David would then discover massive irregularities in the logistics accounts I managed, triggering an emergency internal audit. An audit that would point directly to my forged signature in the recently emptied portfolio. They were not just stealing from me, they were orchestrating my professional execution. Julian would be in Zurich, a victim of his wife's corporate malfeasance. Sabine would be comforting him. I would be detained in Frankfurt, facing extradition. I scrolled back, checking the dates. The first email to David Finch was dated over 1 year ago. 1 year. He had planned this for at least 12 months. The pieces clicked into place with the sickening sound of a cell door locking. His sudden insistence on managing my tax optimization. His suggestion I move the bulk of my personal assets, the money I had earned long before I met him, into that new offshore portfolio. The way he had encouraged this Frankfurt trip, insisting I needed to go in person. Our entire marriage, the shared jokes, the quiet dinners, the plans for a future. It was all a long con. A beautifully executed multi-year fraud. I was not his wife. I was his mark. I did not delete anything. Deletion is for amateurs. I initiated a full bit-by-bit copy of the entire server. Every file, every hidden directory, every email. I transferred it all to a new, physically isolated solid-state drive. I did not use standard encryption. I locked it down using a 2-part algorithm based on logarithmic spirals. A key only I would know. I ejected the drive. It was small, black, and heavier than it looked. It held my entire life, and my entire war chest. The woman who left the airport was heartbroken. The woman sitting in this office was a risk analyst who had just identified the threat. And now, I was going to mitigate it. It was 7 in the morning. The adrenaline from the long night of digging had burned off, leaving behind a sterile clarity. My first instinct was to call a divorce lawyer to begin the scorched earth process of separating a life. But my training stopped me. Julian had not just committed infidelity, he had committed a federal crime. A divorce lawyer was a scalpel. I needed a tactical squad. I scrolled past the numbers for therapists and domestic attorneys. I stopped on a name I respected but had hoped never to need personally: Maya Griffin. Maya was not a divorce attorney. She was a forensic accountant and a former prosecutor who specialized in unraveling complex corporate fraud. She was the person companies hired when a CFO vanished with 8 figures. By 7:45, I was in her glass-walled office in the financial district. The city was just waking up, but Maya looked like she had been operating for hours. I placed the small encrypted hard drive on her desk. It made almost no sound. "I have a situation," I said, my voice flat. "It is part wire fraud, part fiduciary breach, and part criminal conspiracy." Maya, her eyes sharp and analytical, motioned to the drive. "And that is the why and the how." "My husband, Julian, just flew to Zurich with his ex-fiancée. He thinks I am on a flight to Frankfurt. They plan to liquidate my entire personal portfolio and frame me for fraud at my own firm." For the next 20 minutes, Maya was silent. She plugged the drive into a secure, air-gapped laptop and began to read. I watched her expression shift from professional curiosity to sharp, focused anger. She read the emails with David Finch. She analyzed the Swiss Shell Corporation framework. Finally, she clicked on the 3-minute video file from the airport. She listened to Julian's voice, full of excitement, detailing my financial ruin. She watched him stroke Sabine's waist. She muted the audio and leaned back, slowly removing her glasses. "Good God, Alara," she said, her voice quiet. "This isn't a divorce. This is an indictment." "The video," I said. "Is it admissible?" "We are in Colorado. It's a one-party consent state." Maya replied, her gaze hardening. "You were a party to the conversation you were recording. It is absolutely admissible, and it is the nail in his coffin." She turned back to the screen, her mind clearly processing the attack vectors. "They are in Zurich now, trying to activate the trust, Project Atlas. But the file structure here, Julian is arrogant. He documented his own failsafe." She clicked through a protected folder labeled Phase 2. "To move the money out of the initial Swiss trust and into their final, untraceable accounts. The bank requires a final authorization. It's not a password. My stomach tightened. What is it? A physical key fob, a USB security token. The bank will not release the funds without it. I knew exactly what she was talking about. A small black ledger key, identical to the one I used for my own corporate credentials. He had one on his keychain, but he also kept a master key. Where is it? Ilara. In our home safe, in my office. A sudden, terrible silence filled the room. Maya stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the morning traffic. This changes the timeline, she said. I assumed they were fleeing, that Zurich was the final destination. It is, isn't it? She turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw genuine urgency in her eyes. No, the Zurich flight was just to establish the beachhead, to be on site to open the accounts when the wire transfers your money hit the trust. But they cannot complete the operation without that key. The realization dawned on me, cold and horrific. He's coming back. He planned to, Maya said, her voice clipped and fast. He timed this perfectly. He and Sabine fly to Zurich, get the accounts activated. You fly to Frankfurt. They take the first flight back to Denver, arriving while you are still in the air. He walks into your house, uses his key, opens the safe, authorizes the final transfer, and flies back out. By the time you land and check your email, your life is over. David Finch initiates the audit, and you are a fugitive. I looked at my watch. It was 8:30 a.m. They had been in the air for hours. They believed I was trapped in a metal tube, flying over the Atlantic Ocean, completely unaware. Maya, I said, my voice dropping. If they were just setting up the base, they're already on their way back. They could be landing right now. Maya and I were in a cab heading back to Cherry Creek before 9 a.m. The immediate threat was not Julian opening the safe. It was David Finch igniting the fire at Aperture. If that audit began, my corporate credentials would be frozen. I would lose access. I would lose credibility. And I would be fighting a war on two fronts. Julian's entire plan hinged on me being professionally crippled before I even knew I was under attack. Before we set the trap at the house, I have to neutralize my office, I said, my voice hard. If Finch triggers that audit, Julian wins. It does not matter if we catch him at the safe if I am already branded an embezzler. Maya nodded, her expression grim. Who do you trust at Aperture? And I mean really trust. I did not pull up the company directory. I did not need to. I dialed one number from memory. It was a risk, but my entire life was about calculating risk, and this was a necessary one. He answered on the second ring, his voice the same calm baritone I had known for a decade. Ilara, this is a surprise. I thought you were on your way to Frankfurt. Plans changed. Marcus, I said, I am in Denver, and I need to call in a favor, a very large one, right now. Marcus Thorne was my mentor. He had recruited me into Aperture Logistics right out of my MBA program and had guided my career. He was retired from day-to-day operations now, but he held a very powerful, very active seat on the board of directors. There was a short silence on the line. He knew my voice. He knew I did not engage in hyperbole. Tell me. I am the target of an internal setup, an attempt to frame me for significant financial fraud. The vector is an employee, David Finch. I did not mention Julian. I did not mention my marriage. That was personal, emotional, and irrelevant to the corporate threat. This had to be clean. I have credible, indisputable evidence that Finch is conspiring with an external party to trigger a false audit in my absence, using forged credentials. He is a direct and immediate threat to Aperture. Marcus did not ask me how I knew. He did not ask who the external party was. He did not question my evidence. That was the trust we had built over 10 years. He sighed, a sound of deep annoyance. David Finch, I always knew that man was sloppy. He never triple-checked his expense reports. Sloppy men get greedy. Another pause, shorter this time. Leave it to me. Ilara, you handle your end. I will handle this. The line clicked dead. I looked at Maya. Now we wait. We sat in the sterile quiet of her conference room. We were in a race against an unknown flight arrival. Every minute that passed, Julian and Sabine were closer to Denver, closer to my home. 47 minutes dragged by. My corporate phone, which I had left on, buzzed on the polished table. It was a broadcast email from Aperture's chief compliance officer. Subject: urgent internal investigation. Body effective immediately. A surprise internal investigation into the accounts managed by David Finch has been initiated following credible reports of expense-related irregularities. Mr. Finch has been placed on administrative leave. All system access associated with his credentials has been revoked, pending the outcome of the audit. I read it twice. Expense-related irregularities. It was brilliant. Marcus had not gone in accusing Finch of a massive conspiracy. He had used the most banal, effective corporate weapon available. He had him investigated for padding his expenses, an accusation that required an immediate, low-level freeze of his access. My personal phone lit up, a text message from Marcus. "The snake in your nest is defanged." It was done. The threat at Aperture was neutralized. David Finch was locked out. He could not access the system, he could not plant the evidence, and he could not trigger Julian's fake audit. The first pillar of their plan had been demolished. I stood up. "The corporate firewall is stable," I said to Maya. "Now, we go home. We set the trap." We drove back to my house. The bright morning sun felt like a mockery. This was no longer my home. It was a tactical environment. "We are not calling the police," Maya said as we pulled into the garage, echoing my own thoughts. "This is not a robbery. This is a complex financial crime. If we call 911, we get patrolmen who will not understand the situation. They will see a domestic dispute. Julian will talk, he will charm, and he will walk right out of here." "I agree," I said. "This needs to be handled surgically." Maya made the call. Within 20 minutes, a black SUV with tinted windows arrived. Not police. A private security team. Specialists she kept on retainer for high-stakes corporate extractions. 2 men, quiet, dressed in sharp suits, ex-military by their posture. We turned my home into a containment field. While Maya briefed the team, I went to my office and began installing the hardware. They were micro cameras, the kind I used for internal loss prevention audits. I put one in the ceiling smoke detector, giving a perfect overhead view of the room. I put another in a hollowed-out book on the shelf, aimed directly at the safe. "Is this legal?" one of the security men asked, his voice a low rumble. "It is her house," Maya said, not looking up from her laptop. "She can film whatever she wants." "They will be entering under the assumption that she is 6 time zones away. They are not invited guests. They are conspirators here to commit a felony." We set up our own command center in the guest bedroom, down the hall. We had feeds from both cameras. The trap was set. The house was quiet again, waiting. All we had to do was wait for the thieves to use their own key. The clock on the monitor displayed 3:04 p.m. Maya and I sat in the dim light of the guest bedroom, silent, watching the 2 camera feeds. The house was unnervingly still. It had been hours. The security team was in position 1 in the hall closet, the other in the small bathroom adjoining my office. My entire nervous system felt stretched thin, a wire humming at a frequency just below sound. Every car that passed on the street seemed to slow down, and my heart hammered against my ribs. Then, the feed from the driveway camera flickered. A silver Uber pulled to the curb. My breath hitched. The back door opened. Julian stepped out. He was still in the suit he'd worn to the airport, but the tie was loosened, the jacket creased. He looked exhausted, but his movements were sharp, agitated. He was running on adrenaline. Then Sabine emerged from the other side. They met at the trunk, grabbing their small overnight bags. Julian grabbed her hand and squeezed it. He looked excited, triumphant. They were flushed, not with romance, but with the thrill of the score. We switched the primary monitor to the entryway camera. I heard his key in the lock. The sound was obscenely familiar. The deadbolt slid back. The front door opened. "Hurry!" Julian's voice cut through the silence. It was a low, urgent hiss. I knew that voice. It was the one he used when he was about to close a major deal. "We have to get the fob and get to the bank's secure vault before 5. The international transfer window closes." Sabine laughed. The sound was light, airy, and utterly vile. "She is still flying. Poor thing. Probably halfway over Greenland by now, sipping that terrible airline champagne, completely clueless. Poor thing." The condescension was a physical blow. I watched them on the screen, my hands clenched into fists, my nails biting into my palms. Maya placed a calm, steadying hand on my forearm. They did not bother to drop their bags in the foyer. They walked straight down the hall, their footsteps quick and purposeful on the hardwood floors. I switched the feed. Camera 1 office, overhead. Camera 2 office, bookshelf view, aimed directly at the safe. They entered the room. Julian went straight for the large abstract painting that hid the wall safe. Sabine, meanwhile, glanced around the room, her gaze lingering on my desk, on my chair. She was assessing it. She was already redecorating. Julian pulled the painting aside, revealing the flat gray steel of the safe door and its digital keypad. His fingers moved over the numbers. I watched, my heart pounding a sick, slow rhythm. I had always assumed the code was our anniversary. He typed in 6 digits, 1025, October 25th. My blood turned to ice. It was not our anniversary. It was not the day we met. It was not his birthday. It was Sabine's. For our entire marriage, the safe that held our most important documents, passports, wills. My personal security keys had been secured by a code honoring the woman he was waiting to run back to. The lock chirped. The heavy door clicked open. Julian reached inside, his body tense with anticipation. He pulled out the small, black USB ledger fob. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger. A dark little trophy. "Got it," he breathed, a smile of pure, ecstatic relief breaking across his face as he turned to Sabine. "And action," Maya whispered beside me. My hand moved to the smart home control panel I had set up on the nightstand. I tapped the icon for the office. The recessed overhead lights flashed on, flooding the room in a cold, sterile white light. They both froze. Julian's arm, still raised, locked in place. Sabine spun around, a small, startled gasp escaping her. I was standing in the doorway. Julian's face was a perfect portrait of cognitive dissonance. His brain simply could not compute the data. I was not over the Atlantic. I was not sipping champagne. I was here. "Ilara," he stammered. His voice was a dry croak. "What? How?" "You are home. Your flight. Looking for this. Julian." I asked. My voice was quiet, calm, and carried easily in the sudden silence. I raised my right hand, between my thumb and forefinger. I held an identical black USB fob, the real one. I watched the recognition click behind his eyes. He looked from the fob in his hand to the one in mine. He saw the difference. Mine had the small, embossed silver logo of the Swiss bank. His was a blank, generic piece of plastic. "The one you are holding," I said, "is a dead decoy. I changed the authorization keys 2 hours ago." The color drained from his face. The manic energy, the triumph, it all evaporated, leaving behind a gray, hollow-eyed panic. He understood. He had failed. Sabine was the first to move. She let out a sharp, piercing scream and lunged for the doorway, for the hall. She never made it. The door to the adjoining guest bathroom swung open. The first security officer, a man built like a refrigerator in a dark suit, stepped out, completely blocking her path. Julian saw her stop. He spun around, looking for the only other exit. The second security officer stepped out of the hall closet, sealing the hallway behind me. They were boxed in. The office, their intended staging ground, had become a trap. Julian looked from one guard to the other, his gaze frantic, the useless decoy still clutched in his hand. The brilliant planner, the con man, the thief, was suddenly and completely caged. Julian's face cycled through a spectrum of failures, panic, disbelief, and then the mask. The salesman clicked on. He dropped the decoy fob on the carpet as if it were toxic and raised his hands in a gesture of placation, as if approaching a startled animal. "Ilara, thank God you are home. When did you get back?" He was already pivoting, his voice attempting to regain its familiar, soothing cadence. "This is not what it looks like, I swear. Sabine and we found something. A massive discrepancy in the accounts. I was checking the safe for your tax files. I was worried you were being framed. I was trying to protect you." His ability to lie was breathtaking. He was trying to co-opt my reality, to make me the victim he was saving. He was trying to sell me a fantasy while standing in the ruins of the trap he had set. I did not speak. I did not have to. Maya Griffin stepped past me, moving from the hallway into the center of the room. She was the picture of corporate power, and her presence sucked all the domesticity from the air, transforming my office into what it now was, an interrogation room. Julian's eyes snapped to her, his attempted smile faltering. "Who the hell are you?" "Good afternoon, Mr. Vance, Ms. Dubois," Maya said, her voice cutting through his attempted bluster. "My name is Maya Griffin. I am Ms. Vance's legal counsel." She placed a slim, hard-sided briefcase on my desk, clicking the latches open. She removed 2 thick, bright blue folders and set them side by side with a quiet, definitive thud. "This," she said, tapping the one on the left, "is folder A." Julian stared at it. Sabine seemed to shrink, her eyes wide with terror, pressing herself against the wall as if she could merge with the drywall. "Folder A contains a summary judgment for the dissolution of your marriage," Maya continued, speaking directly to Julian, though her words applied to both of them. "It outlines an immediate and total forfeiture of all assets, joint or disputed. You will waive all rights, claims, and future earnings related to Ms. Vance. It also contains a full prepared confession detailing the conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate malfeasance. It names both of you." Maya's voice was cold, flat, like a surgeon listing instruments. "Furthermore, it includes a permanent, mutual restraining order, and finally, a binding, lifelong non-disclosure agreement that prohibits both of you from ever seeking employment in the logistics or private finance sectors in North America. You will effectively cease to exist in this industry. You sign. You walk out of here with nothing but the clothes you are wearing." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Sabine's shallow, ragged breathing. It was Sabine who spoke, her voice a reedy whisper. And folder B." Maya's gaze shifted to her. "Folder B is an alternative. It is a full data dump of the Project Atlas hard drive. It includes the cloned server, the emails with Mr. Finch, the detailed plans for the Swiss shell corporations, and the 3-minute high-definition audio-video file from Gate J14 this morning." I watched Julian flinch, his eyes darting to me as Maya confirmed the existence of the video. "It is compiled," Maya said, "and ready for delivery to the Denver District Attorney's Office and the FBI's White-Collar Crime Task Force. If you choose folder B, these gentlemen," she nodded to the 2 silent security officers, "will perform a citizen's arrest on behalf of Ms. Vance, and you will be held for police custody. You will be indicted. You will be tried. And, given this evidence, you will be convicted. You will face substantial prison time." This was the moment, the pivot point. My analysis of Julian was that he was a narcissist, but his primary driver was singular self-preservation. I predicted he would fold. I did not predict the speed. Before Maya had even finished her sentence, Julian, in a single desperate act of cowardly survival, spun around and pointed a shaking finger directly at Sabine. "It was her!" he shouted, his voice cracking, pitching high. "It was all her. She planned it. She planned everything. She said you were weak. She said you deserved it. She seduced me. She put me up to this. I am a victim here. Ilara, I just went along with it." I watched Sabine's face. I had seen her at the airport, glowing with triumph. The victor. I had seen her in my office, sneering at my belongings, the usurper. Now, I saw her shatter. The adoration, the shared victory, the belief that she was his equal partner, it all dissolved in a single second of pure, unadulterated betrayal. Her expression of shock morphed into a look of such profound, bottomless disgust that it was almost terrifying. She finally saw the man she had destroyed her life for. He was not a mastermind. He was a coward, a pathetic, whimpering coward. "That is enough," I said. My first words to him since the airport. Maya looked at her watch. "You have 5 minutes. You both sign folder A, or we proceed with folder B. The clock is ticking." She slid folder A to the center of the desk, next to a pen. Julian scrambled for it. He did not read a single word. He ripped the cap off the pen and scribbled his name on every line, his hands shaking so badly the signature was barely legible. Sabine, her face white and her eyes completely dead, walked slowly, like a zombie, to the desk. She picked up the pen after him. She signed. The security team escorted them out. Julian did not look back. He was a deflated, shambling wreck. Sabine, however, stopped at the threshold and turned. Her eyes, no longer dead, were burning with a cold, pure hatred. It was a look of such violence that it was almost a physical force. It was aimed entirely at Julian. Then she was gone. Maya and I stood in the hallway. The silence they left behind was vast. "It's over," Maya said, closing her briefcase. "The house is yours. The accounts are frozen. They have nothing." But it was not over. My heart was not celebrating. My brain was still running. "Thank you, Maya," I said. "Send me the bill. I need a few hours." After she left, I locked the front door. The house felt contaminated. I went back to my office, the command center, and sat down. The 2 blue folders were still on my desk. I pushed them aside. I still had the encrypted hard drive. I still had Project Atlas. The immediate threat was gone, but the analysis was incomplete. A loose thread was bothering me. Something from the airport video. Julian's excitement. It was more than just the thrill of stealing my money. It was the thrill of building something. He was a con man, but like all great con men, he had an all-consuming vision. His was a green tech startup. For the last 6 months, he had been insufferable, dropping buzzwords at dinner parties, talking about his revolutionary carbon modeling algorithm. He claimed it could predict supply chain carbon footprints with 99% accuracy. I had dismissed it as sales talk, the vaporware he was designing to lure his next round of investors. Now I had the source code. I was not just a risk analyst. I understood complex systems. I opened the root files. I expected to find a mess, a poorly disguised open source code, something barely functional. My fingers froze on the keyboard. It was not a mess. It was elegant. The code was complex, layered, and incredibly sophisticated. The mathematical model it was based on was unlike anything I had ever seen. I ran a few simulations based on the data models he had included. It worked. It was not just functional. It was revolutionary. This was the problem. This code was brilliant, and Julian was not. Julian was a charismatic salesman. He could sell ice in a blizzard. He could charm a board of directors into funding a fantasy. But he could not write a single line of Python, let alone architect a quantum-level data model. He was a fraud, which meant the foundation of his new life. This Project Atlas had to be a fraud too. My analyst's mind took over. An asset this valuable is never created in a vacuum. It has a source. I went deeper into the hard drive, past the pristine files in the main directory. I searched for fragments, hidden directories, metadata. I found a cluster of cached files, original code notes that he had clearly tried to delete. I opened them, and I saw the notations, the variable naming conventions, the comment structure. A cold dread, entirely separate from my marital betrayal, settled over me. I had seen this before. I powered up my old Aperture archives, the secure backup I kept for all my past projects. I ran a search query, not for carbon, but for the specific, unique mathematical syntax I saw in the notes. One file matched. It was a funding proposal I had reviewed 14 months ago. Lisbon Applied Dynamics, a small 2-person research lab in Portugal. They were physicists, not businessmen. Their proposal was a mess, commercially unviable, full of academic jargon and with no clear path to market. But their core technology, it was here. It was Project Atlas, every last line of it. I remembered the meeting, 2 brilliant, hopeful scientists on a grainy video call. I remembered my final report. I had declined to fund them. My official reason, written in my own hand, was significant market integration risk and unproven commercial scalability. Julian must have seen that report. He had access to my files. He had seen my professional assessment. He had not just seen my assets, he had seen my deal flow. He saw a brilliant, revolutionary algorithm, ripe for the plucking. He saw my analysis of why it failed, not because the tech was bad, but because the scientists were, and he had formulated a new, darker plan. He would not just steal my money to start a company. He would steal a company to start with my money. This was a double heist. He was defrauding me to fund the launch of a technology he was stealing from those 2 scientists in Lisbon. He was going to scam his new investors, the venture capitalists he was meant to be meeting in Seattle, with intellectual property that was not his. The entire con was layered, a masterpiece of parasitic theft. I looked at the original proposal. Lisbon Applied Dynamics. They were probably bankrupt by now, their genius algorithm sitting dead on a server in a basement. I stood up. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My revenge was incomplete. Neutralizing Julian was just defense. This was the offense. I picked up my phone and dialed Maya. Maya, it's me. I need a favor. Book me the next flight out of Denver. Where to Zurich, to clean out the accounts. No, I said, looking at the Lisbon proposal on my screen. To Portugal. 48 hours after Julian signed away his life. I was on a different plane. One I had paid for myself, and I was flying east. I landed in Lisbon, a city I did not know, on a mission that had nothing to do with Aperture Logistics. It took another day to find them. Lisbon Applied Dynamics was not in a tech park. It was not even in a proper office building. I found the address in the Alfama district, down a narrow, cobbled street. The lab was in a damp, poorly lit basement, powered by a tangle of extension cords. Foreclosure notices were taped to the inside of the glass brick window. Inside, I found 2 men, Dr. Tiago Alves and Dr. Nuno Reis. They were both brilliant, both exhausted, and both clearly surviving on little more than espresso and stubbornness. They were surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations that were, to me, a form of high art. They were wary, expecting another creditor. I did not introduce myself as a risk analyst. I introduced myself as an investor. I am Alara Vance, I said, looking at the models running on their ancient computers. I reviewed your proposal to Aperture Logistics 14 months ago. Their faces fell. Dr. Alves, the elder of the 2, began to power down the monitor. As we said in our email, we are no longer seeking funding. I know, I interrupted. I am not here from Aperture. I am here for myself. I declined your proposal. We know, Race said, his voice bitter. Your report, market integration risk. You said we had no path? I was right, I said, meeting his gaze. You had no path. But your technology? Your algorithm is the most valuable asset I have seen in a decade. I know this for a fact. A thief showed me just how valuable it is." They stared at me, confused. "I am not here to buy your technology," I said. "I am here to invest in it, to build the path you were missing." I explained my terms. I would provide the seed capital, all of it. The money I had just clawed back from Julian's failed Zurich scheme. My entire offshore portfolio would be the runway. We would not be partners in the old world sense. I would not be taking their intellectual property. We would form a new company. They would be the majority shareholders, the owners of the IP. I would be the CEO, the architect of the corporate structure, the risk manager, and the market strategist. I would give their genius the armor and the weapons it needed to actually compete. "A thief," Dr. Alves said slowly. "Tried to steal this. He did more than try." I said, "He stole it, built a business plan around it, and was actively shopping it to investors. He almost succeeded." Their anger was palpable, but beneath it, for the first time, I saw hope. They finally understood what they had. We formed the company that week. We called it Ethelred Solutions. The name was a dark, private joke for me. Ethelred was an Old English name meaning noble counsel. It was a permanent, bitter reminder of the noble counsel Julian had given me when he advised me to move my money, all while planning to steal it. We moved them out of the basement and into a real office. For the next 6 months, I did not think about my old life. I worked. I flew between Denver and Lisbon. I used my Aperture network not to betray my old firm, but to build my new one. I brought in the best software engineers to turn their theoretical model into a scalable, secure software-as-a-service product. I handled the patents, the international incorporation, the risk modeling. Dr. Alves and Dr. Race did what they did best. They innovated. Freed from the burden of foreclosure and energized by a real budget, they refined the algorithm. It was no longer just a theory. It was a product. By the end of the 6th month, we had a viable, marketable platform that could do exactly what Julian had promised. Only ours was real. During that time, I did one last piece of research. Who was Julian really going to pitch his talk of Seattle VCs was vague, but Project Atlas had a target list. One name appeared over and over, a name that made my blood run cold. It was not a small agile tech fund. It was Kincaid Global Ventures, KGV. KGV was not a venture capital firm. It was a leviathan, a ruthless, old money private equity fund known for hostile takeovers, asset stripping, and having zero tolerance for failure. Their CEO, the titular Kincaid, was a legend, a shark who smelled blood from a mile away. This was Julian's real target. He was not just going to scam a few angel investors. He was planning to defraud one of the most dangerous financial players in the world. His arrogance was exceeded only by his stupidity, and I realized he was still out there. He was broke. He was blacklisted, but he still had his copy of the stolen business plan. He was desperate, and a desperate Julian was a predictable Julian. He would try again. He had to. It was the only play he had left. Julian was bankrupt. The NDA and the blacklisting had crippled him in North America. He was a social and professional pariah in Denver. But he was still Julian. He was arrogant. He was a salesman, and he was desperate. And he still had one thing, his copy of the stolen Project Atlas business plan, the one he had spent a year perfecting before his life imploded. He must have believed I was finished with him, that forcing him to sign away my assets and my name was the extent of my revenge. He assumed I was a victim satisfied with getting her money back. He could not conceive that I had gone deeper, that I had analyzed the source of his con. He did not know I knew about Lisbon, so, for 6 months, he must have begged. He must have called in every favor, leveraged every last shred of his former reputation. And he finally, impossibly, landed the meeting, not with a mid-level fund, but with the man himself. A final, all-or-nothing pitch to Kincaid, the head of Kincaid Global Ventures, in their San Francisco headquarters. I knew about the meeting because Kincaid's office had called me 2 days earlier. I was not in the boardroom for the pitch. I was in an observation lounge 1 floor above, watching a live feed on a plasma screen. Dr. Alves and Dr. Race sat with me, dressed in new, sharp suits I had bought them. They looked nervous, but resolute. On the screen, Julian was performing for his life. The KGV boardroom was an intimidating expanse of glass and steel overlooking the bay. Julian, thinner and with a visible tremor in his hands that he tried to disguise with broad gestures, was pacing. He was using the slides I had helped him design, the market projections I had run. He was selling my strategy, built on the back of their genius. "And so?" he finished, his voice hoarse. "Project Atlas is not just a company. It is the future of carbon modeling, a 99% accurate predictive algorithm that will revolutionize global logistics." He was sweating, but he was smiling. He had made it. At the head of the impossibly long table, Mr. Kincaid, a man in his 60s with the bored eyes of a predator, steepled his fingers. He had been silent for the entire 30-minute presentation. "Impressive, Mr. Vance," Kincaid said. His voice was a quiet rumble, but it filled the room. "Very impressive." Julian's relief was so profound. I could see it on the high-definition screen. He visibly relaxed, that old, oily charm surfacing. "Thank you, Mr. Kincaid. We are very excited about the—" "However," Kincaid interrupted, the word slicing through Julian's self-congratulation. "My diligence team has a few concerns." "They have been running analysis for the last 48 hours. Kincaid tapped a paper on his desk. "They have some rather persistent questions about the provenance of the intellectual property. They cannot seem to verify its origin." Julian's blood must have run cold, but his salesman's mask was seamless. He let out a practiced, dismissive chuckle. "Oh, that," he said, waving his hand as if swatting a fly. "Well, that is the secret sauce, is it not? It is entirely proprietary, developed in-house over the last 2 years, confidential, of course." Kincaid stared at him. "Proprietary, developed by you." "That is correct," Julian said, sealing his own coffin. Kincaid looked up, not at Julian, but at a small, dark camera lens in the corner of the room. He gave a single curt nod. In my observation lounge, a green light on the console illuminated. That was our signal. "Gentlemen," I said to Dr. Alves and Dr. Race, "it is time." The main boardroom door was heavy, soundproofed, and opened with a near-silent electronic hiss. Julian was still speaking. "The security protocols around the core code are, as you can imagine, extreme." He heard the latch click. He turned, annoyance flashing across his face, expecting an interruption from an assistant. His face did not fall. It simply ceased to function. The color drained away, leaving a gray, waxy sheen. His jaw went slack. He was looking at a ghost. I walked steadily into the room. My heels clicked, the only sound in the vast, sudden silence. Dr. Alves and Dr. Race flanked me, their expressions grim. I stopped 10 feet from him. "Hello, Julian," I said. My voice was even. "Ilara," he whispered. It was not a word, just a puff of air. What are you doing here?" "I am here for the pitch," I said, allowing myself a small, cold smile. "It was very thorough. You hit all the key points of the Ethelred business model." He just stared, his brain unable to connect the pieces. He looked at me, then at Kincaid, who was watching the exchange with the mild interest of a man watching a play he had already read. "You did forget one crucial detail, though," I continued. "The introductions." I stepped back slightly, gesturing to the man on my right. "Julian, I believe you have met Dr. Tiago Alves and, of course, Dr. Nuno Reis." I watched Julian's eyes flicker to them and then back to me, still blank, still failing to understand. "They are the actual creators," I clarified, my voice sharp and precise. Of the revolutionary algorithm you just spent the last 30 minutes claiming as your own. Julian's face was a mask of white plaster. The blood had simply left his body. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp, the name sounding foreign and dead on his tongue. You. What are you doing here?" Mr. Kincaid stood up. He was a tall man, and the movement seemed to pull all the oxygen in the room toward him, commanding absolute attention. He did not look at Julian. He looked at me. "Ms. Vance contacted my office last week," Kincaid said, his voice a calm, deep baritone. I noted the name. Ms. Vance. I had already legally reverted to my maiden name. The sound of it was clean, unburdened. Kincaid's gaze finally shifted, pinning Julian to his chair. "We do not appreciate being lied to, Mr. Vance. We take intellectual property theft very seriously. Upon receiving Ms. Vance's evidence, we performed our own dual due diligence." Kincaid picked up a single sheet of paper from his desk, glancing at it briefly. "My team, intrigued by the claims, made a small investment into your shell corporation 4 days ago. Just a minor transfer, enough to activate the account agreements." Julian was shaking his head, a silent, frantic denial, but Kincaid raised his voice just enough to cut him off. "That small transfer gave us standing. It triggered an immediate and very thorough IP audit. Your proprietary code, Mr. Vance, is in direct violation of 3 separate international patents held by—" Kincaid gestured with an open hand to my colleagues. "Dr. Alves and Dr. Race. Gentlemen, I apologize on behalf of my firm for not catching this sooner." This was the final blow. The last bit of air left Julian's lungs. He did not just sit. He collapsed into the expensive leather chair, his legs giving out. The salesman was gone. The charmer was gone. All that was left was the hollowed-out, pathetic failure. He looked at me, his eyes wide, vacant, and filled with a sudden, childish terror. "You ruined me," he whispered across the vast, polished table. I felt nothing, no surge of triumph, no residual anger, no pity. It was just the cold, quiet satisfaction of a complex calculation finally resolving to 0. I walked past him. I did not stop. I moved to the head of the table, taking the seat opposite Kincaid, the seat of power that Julian had been so desperately trying to occupy. "You ruined yourself, Julian," I said, my voice calm, the words precise. "You self-destructed the moment you decided to steal. I am not the cause of your failure. I am merely the consequence. I simply brought the rightful owners to the negotiating table." Kincaid smiled. It was the first genuine expression I had seen from him, the appreciative smile of one predator recognizing another. "Ethelred Solutions," he said, tapping the pristine folder in front of him. "My diligence team was, unlike their findings on Mr. Vance, extremely impressed. We are prepared to offer $50 million for the Series A funding round." He paused. "We will, of course, follow your lead on the terms." I looked straight across the polished wood at the trembling man who used to be my husband. "My first term is simple," I said. Kincaid's legal team, sitting silently against the wall, looked up, their pens ready. I nodded at Julian, "signs a new, binding non-disclosure agreement. It will explicitly forbid him, for the remainder of his natural life, from ever mentioning the words carbon modeling or supply chain logistics in any professional context. He will never work in this industry, or any adjacent to it, ever again." I paused, letting the words settle. "And he does not receive a single cent. He walks away with nothing." One of Kincaid's lawyers, efficient and silent, immediately stood and placed a new, thick document in front of Julian. He did not try to argue. He did not try to negotiate. He was a ghost. He picked up the heavy, expensive pen with a shaking hand and scratched his name, his signature a frantic, jagged line of failure. "Security," Kincaid said, his voice not unkind, just final. Please show Mr. Vance out of the building. Two uniformed guards, who had clearly been waiting outside the door, entered and flanked Julian. They pulled him gently to his feet and guided him out of the room. I did not watch him go. I stood and turned to the massive glass wall of the boardroom, which overlooked the main lobby atrium 3 floors below. I saw Julian's small, defeated figure cross the vast marble expanse toward the front doors. He stopped. He was looking at the main reception desk. A woman was working there, handing a visitor's badge to a guest. She was wearing the standard-issue blue blazer of the building's temporary staff, a small white tag on her lapel. She looked up, her eyes meeting his across the atrium. Even from this distance, I recognized her. Sabine. Her blacklisting had been thorough. She had been forced to take the lowest-level temp job she could find, and it just happened to be here, at the site of his final total humiliation. She had a front-row seat to his definitive exit. She watched him, motionless, as the security guards pushed him through the revolving doors and out onto the street. I turned away from the window. Julian Vance was no longer a variable in my equation. He was a closed file. I turned back to the table, back to the real work. I held out my hand to Mr. Kincaid and then to Dr. Alves, who looked, for the first time in over a year, like he could finally breathe. Now, I said, as I shook his hand, let us talk about changing the world. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am curious, where in the world are you listening from? Let me know in the comments so we can connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.